Brought to you by the Allied Project, we are pleased to kick off the Spring 2025 Allied Talk series with Marion Gwizdala. Marion is a dedicated expert on service animal rights, the founder and CEO of Advocates for Service Animal Partners. In this presentation, we'll explore the vital role service animals play in the lives of individuals with disabilities. Marion shares insights on the work these incredible service animals do and the legal protections that ensure equal access. We hope you find it informative and inspiring. Let's get started.
Welcome everybody and welcome for the kickoff meeting to Allied. That's Allies Leading Learning, Inclusion, Education of Disabilities. Thank you all for joining us and may we have an amazing semester. I do want to start off first by saying that our manager of last semester has now moved on to doing cool things, and now we have a new Allied manager that I want to introduce. Her name is Mary Jo. You want to say hi?
Hello, everyone.
Mary Jo is pretty cool. She actually is a master's student at Northeastern doing her master's in speech language pathology. She graduated with an undergrad from UCLA in a degree in like a triple, like 2 double degrees and a minor, right? Like
Yeah.
you did linguistics and psychology and
Right.
a minor in disability studies. So I think Allied is in amazing hands. So take it away. Take it away, Mary Jo.
Thank you for introducing me, Dr. Mona. Yeah, I'm really happy to take on this project. I think it aligns with a lot of my principles and what I plan to apply to my future practice as an SLP. So today, to start us off, we have our first guest speaker. His name is Marion Gwizdala. He is joining us from Florida. He is the founder, CEO, and president of founder of Advocates for Service Animal Partners, or short for ASAP.
Nice.
So go ahead, Marion, take it away.
Well, thank you very much, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come before you and to share some important information. I was telling Mary that I was up in Maryland last week, and I was talking to my daughter, and I was telling her about this presentation, and she looked at me and said, "Dad, you know I'm a Husky nurse, right?" And that fact kind of had slipped me by, but it kind of it gives me an extra incentive to do this program and to share the information with you. So I want to share a little bit about myself first. First of all, I am not an attorney. I'm a non-legal advocate. The closest I've ever gotten to studying law was a business law class in 1992. And even though the Americans with Disabilities Act had already been passed, very, very little attention was given to it. So one of my goals has been to educate people who are going to be in decision-making roles and in policy-making roles. And those include people who are in business administration, people who are involved in public health, people who are involved in the medical fields, and people who are involved in the hospitality industries, because those are the areas that we find the biggest challenges, partly because of the fact that I think that their exposure is so much greater. You know, everybody seeks medical attention. Everybody goes out and eats at restaurants, and people stay in hotels quite a bit. So those 3 industries are the top 3 industries where we find the most discrimination occurring. And I believe that the biggest challenge and the biggest reason for that discrimination is not maliciousness, but it's a lack of education, a lack of information. One of my favorite adages is it's better to educate than to litigate. And so I'm here to provide a little bit of education so that hopefully as you move through your professional careers, you can help those companies that you serve avoid the litigation. I also want to share another adage with you that my wife has contrived, and she says, when the victim becomes the defendant becomes the victim. And what that means is that many times when we face discrimination due to the presence of our service animals, it somehow gets turned around back to us, and we're the ones who have caused the problem because we might get a little indignant, and who wouldn't when their civil rights are being violated. So I do my best, and I encourage people when they're facing discrimination to keep their cool, to provide information, and to not give them a reason to make you the defendant as the disabled person. And finally, I want to confront one other adage that we hear quite a bit, and we hear this a lot, mostly from law enforcement, surprisingly enough. But many law enforcement officers and many individuals have this mistaken belief that a company can deny service to anyone they wish for any reason at all. And that is simply untrue. It has not been true since 1964, which is when the Civil Rights Act was passed. There are certain characteristics that are protected classes, and you're not allowed to discriminate against someone based upon those protected classes. So what I want to do is I want to approach this as if I'm educating professionals who are going to take this information to those who are in a position to make policy decisions concerning service animals, because I think that the best way to avoid challenges is to have good, sound policies and protocol concerning service animals that guide us down the path and guide us in an understanding of these principles. Now, I could go through probably a whole 3-semester class about the ADA, but we only got 45 minutes, not 45 hours. So I'm going to focus upon one very, very small section of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that is those provisions which concern service animals in places of public accommodation. So the Americans with Disabilities Act is a federal law. It was enacted in 1990, to be precise, July 26, 1990. It was signed into law by George H.W. Bush on July 26, 1990. So we're approaching the 35th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination in various different settings. There are 5 basic titles or chapters of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And by the way, if we're going along, if you have a question, feel free to interrupt and ask your question. If it's something I'm going to talk about a little bit later in my presentation, I'll let you know that. But I know that many times, if I wait till the end, people will say, I had a question, but I don't remember what it was now. So feel free to ask your questions as we go along. So the Americans with Disabilities Act is divided up into 5 titles, or what we might refer to as chapters. And each chapter, each title has a very specific focus. Title 1 deals with a prohibition of discrimination in employment, and it's administered by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Title 2 deals with what are known as public entities. A public entity is a governmental entity, includes any governmental sector except for the federal government. The federal government is not bound by the Americans with Disabilities Act. They have their own set of statutes, own set of laws, which are coded in the Rehabilitation Act of Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Title 3 deals with private companies that provide public accommodations, and Title 4 deals with communications, and Title 5 are a bunch of miscellaneous provisions. We're going to focus for our purposes today on Title 3 of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Title 3, again, are private entities that provide public accommodations. And it's administered by the Departments of Justice and Transportation depending upon the type of company it is. So, and the provisions of Title III and Title II are virtually the same. The only difference between the two is that there's a little bit of difference in the coding, but the words are nearly identical. So again, if we understand Title III, we will understand Title II. So we're focusing upon service animals. So the first and most obvious question is, what is a service animal? A service animal is defined by the implementing regulations of the ADA as any dog that has been individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of a person with a disability. So the first thing to see is that under the definition, a service animal is a dog. Now, I also want to say, and we're not going to go too much into it, but every state in the United States also has specific state laws which prohibit discrimination based upon disability. And some of those state laws define a service animal a little differently. I think there's two that use the old definition, which was any animal. But those are very rare. Wisconsin is one state I know of that has such a law, but most of them have, in the past 35 years, been amended to the point that they refer now only to dogs. So it's
May I
any
ask
dog.
a question?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, but sorry, this is Mona here, and do you by any chance know about Massachusetts? Like, this is the first time I thought, like, to hear that a service animal is only considered one if it's a dog. It's the first time I hear this.
Okay.
So, yeah, which is really interesting to me. So is Massachusetts also?
Massachusetts uses the definition. I'm not familiar exactly with the Massachusetts law, but I believe 37 states have laws that are criminal in their remedies. And I believe Massachusetts is one of the 13 that don't provide criminal remedies, they provide civil remedies. But don't quote me on that, I don't know. But I do have a copy of Massachusetts law. Unfortunately, I didn't think of including it in my list of documents, but I can include the Massachusetts law and send it to Mary, and that way y'all can see what it says in Massachusetts. However, if you go to our website, which is serviceanimals.info,
Marion,
yes.
sorry, you just found out in Massachusetts, you can have a service animal of a dog or a miniature horse.
Miniature
Correct.
horse or pony? It's a pony.
Pony?
It's for the blind. It's
Yeah.
because like the blind use miniature ponies or horses. Like, is it a horse or
It says a miniature horse.
miniature horse?
Yes.
So it sounds like it was really specifically designed for blind.
Yes, and I was going to get into that too, because the Americans with Disabilities Act also includes miniature horses, but not specifically in its definition. What it says about miniature horses is that if a public accommodation can accommodate for the size and the weight of the miniature horse, then they can allow it as a service animal. However, again, the definition only mentions dogs. But in the information that I've shared, which are the implementing regulations of Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act, there is a section that deals specifically with miniature horses. So it sounds like Massachusetts law has been updated since in the past 35 years, and I would expect that. There's a very strong disability contingency in Massachusetts.
Fascinating.
So again, let's go back to the definition. So a service animal is any dog individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of a disability, and that includes a physical disability, a sensory disability, a psychiatric disability, an intellectual or other mental disability, and psychiatric disabilities. And the law specifically says, and again, this is the federal law, that other species of animals, whether wild or domestic, trained or untrained, are not service animals for the purposes of this definition. Now, again, a state can make a law that's a little broader in scope, which, as I said, some states have either done or failed to do by not changing their definition. So they can grant greater rights, but they can't restrict the rights that a person has under the federal law. It's important to note that the work or the tasks that the dog is trained to perform must be directly related to the person's disability. In other words, there has to be what they call a nexus between the disability and the task that the dog is trained to perform. So examples of work or tasks that the dog can be trained to perform include assisting individuals who are blind or have low vision with navigation or other tasks, alerting people who are deaf or hard of hearing to the presence of people or other sounds, providing non-violent protection. That means they will work to protect an individual from outside stressors in a way that is not aggressive or violent. They can pull wheelchairs. They can assist an individual during a seizure, alert an individual to the presence of allergens, and retrieve items such as medicine or the telephone, provide physical support for balance, and helping people with psychiatric or psychological disabilities by preventing or interrupting destructive behaviors. The presence of the animal, the crime deterrent presence of the animal, is not a trained task, neither is the provision of emotional support. We've heard about emotional support animals. Emotional support animals are dogs that are not trained, or I should say animals that are not trained, but whose mere presence provides some sort of benefit to them. They are not allowed in public places. It says miniature horses. Miniature horses are also considered service animals if the place of public accommodation can accommodate for the size and the weight of the miniature horse. Miniature horses are like large dogs. They probably weigh.
They're really big. Like, did you ever experience one, Marion? Like,
oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they're kind of big. And like, I mean, they go up. I don't know. This person's miniature horse was legit. Like, I think their face was like at my face level.
That's really big.
I feel like they were smaller than a horse.
Yeah. Yeah, and they range in size. The largest one I saw was probably about 120 pounds and stood about 30 inches tall. So.
Oh, okay. Well, then my friend's wasn't miniature, but she was using it as a guide horse, and she was riding the train in Michigan, like public transportation.
Yeah.
I don't know. It blew my mind.
So let's talk about how to assess what a service animal is, because if you're in a place where someone comes in with a service animal, you are allowed to ask questions, and the person is required by the law to answer the questions. And you can ask these questions unless it's obvious that the dog has been trained. So, for instance, I'm blind and my guide dog guides me. So when I go into a public place and I'm observed as I enter into the place holding my dog's harness and my dog guiding me, it is obvious to anybody who sees me that my dog is a service dog because it's actually observed doing its work. So if it's observed guiding a person who is blind or pulling a wheelchair, then it is considered a service animal and really questions should not be asked. However, my opinion is I would prefer that companies ask the questions, and they ask the questions of everyone, because there's a lot of people out there who think that just because their dog makes them feel better, that they can take it into a public place. And the challenge with that is not that the dog is going to be well behaved, but the fact of the matter is that most pets are not accustomed to being out in public and the demands of being out in public. the specific noises, the sights that they might see. They might get startled by something as they turn a corner. So many things that can cause the dog to be out of control that indicates that dog really should not be out in public. So I encourage businesses to ask questions of everyone who has a service dog entering into their place so that they can adequately assess the presence of a service dog. So because a service dog is a dog individually trained to do work for a person with a disability, you are allowed to ask, you meaning a place of public accommodation, are able to ask certain questions in order to assess the person's need for the service animal. The first question is this a service animal required because of a disability? For the most part, only people with disabilities are protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act, and only persons with disabilities have a right to be accompanied by a service animal. So basically what you're asking at this point is, are you a person with a disability? Now you can't ask what the disability is, and because many people have hidden disabilities. You can only ask if the service animal is required because of a disability. Since a service animal is trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of a person with a disability, you can also ask what work or what tasks is the dog trained to perform. And this is what they call credible assurance. Now, you might say, well, anybody can answer the questions correctly, and that's true. If someone's going to bring a dog that's not trained into a public place and they know what questions can be asked, they're going to know how to answer the questions. However, the one element that can't be faked is the behavior of the dog. So what we're dealing here is a concept called credible assurance. So as you ask the questions, the real question is it really believable that this person has a service animal? Is it really believable that the dog is a highly trained service dog? Does it sit quietly behind the person as you're talking to them, or does it extend out to the end of the leash and greet other people? Does it whine? Does it bark? Does it otherwise seem as if the dog is not really a trained service dog? So that's what is called credible or believable assurance. So it refers not only to the answers to the questions, but how believable is the behavior of the dog that it is a trained service dog. Again, you can't ask about the nature of the disability. You can't ask for a demonstration. If a person has a dog that alerts them to the presence of seizures, there's no way that person can demonstrate what that dog does without having a seizure. So you can't ask for a demonstration of what the dog is trained to do. You can also not require any sort of documentation. Documentation can be created on a printer. There are companies that you can write to and you can pay them $100, $200, $300, and you can get a little card that says this dog has been registered as a service animal. Well, there's no such thing as registration of service animals. There's no specific rules or laws which require a service animal to undergo any specific sort of training. In other words, it doesn't have to be trained by a professional. In fact, most service animals are what we call owner trained. Most people are aware of guide dogs. Guide dog training programs are very well heeled. They've got lots of money, and they provide service dogs to blind people at no charge. However, no other service animal program does such a thing. In order for an individual to get a service animal under most circumstances from other types of service animal programs, that person has to raise an amount of about $25,000 to $35,000 in order to undergo the training. So in other words, they have to raise the money for the organization in order to get the training. That's pretty cost inhibitive, and it's not difficult to train a dog to do some of its work, and there's a lot of online resources to help people do that. Think of this, how many of us have trained our dogs to fetch. You throw a ball, the dog runs after it, picks up the ball and brings it back to you. Well, if you're disabled and you can't bend over and pick something up, or you use a wheelchair, that now becomes a trained task, and that qualifies that dog as a service dog because it's retrieving dropped items that the individual needs as a result of their disability. So again, you can't require any sort of documentation, and that includes not only documentation that the dog has been trained, but it also includes documentation that the dog has been vaccinated. There are many places that I've seen online that say, in order to have access with your service dog, you must present documentation that it's been vaccinated. Now, we have to vaccinate our dogs if our local municipalities require it, but places of public accommodation are not law enforcement, and they can't require us to demonstrate that the dog has been vaccinated. Service animals are not pets. They are service animals. And so if a place has a pet policy, those pet policies do not apply to people with service dogs. So we're not required to comply with policies or practices that are applicable to people with pets. So let's talk about, are there any questions up to this point?
I have a question. Sorry, this is Mona again.
Yeah, hi, Mona.
What happens if somebody shows up to a public accommodation, has their service dog, right? And the public accommodation maybe has prejudice against service dogs. Or like, if you're an Uber driver, because I know I've had blind friends that, I'm blind myself. I've had blind friends who have been like rejected to get into an Uber because of their guide dog.
Mm-hmm.
What then? Like, what if that person asks a question and decides that no, this dog isn't.
Well, it's not up to the person to decide. It's up to the person to ask the questions and to get the credible assurance and to make sure that the dog is behaving itself. There are very limited reasons why a person with a disability accompanied by a service animal can be asked to remove the dog. The dog must be kept on a leash or a harness or tether, unless the presence of the leash, harness, or tether interferes with the work that the dog is trained to perform. So as I said, if someone uses a wheelchair and they drop something and it goes beyond the extension of the leash, the person can take the dog off the leash, allow it to retrieve the item, bring it back to them, and put the dog back on the leash. The dog shouldn't greet other people. It shouldn't be disruptive. The dog, it shouldn't bark. It shouldn't approach other people. But just because someone perceives that the individual doesn't, quote, need the dog, it's not up to them to make that decision. If the dog is well behaved, if the dog is under control, and the person asserts that they are a person with a disability and the dog has been trained to perform tasks, then it should be allowed. We do have a lot of problems with Uber. In fact, Uber just came out with a new policy called a self-identification policy that just started Monday. And what it allows is that for people who use service dogs, they can give advance notice to Uber that they have a service dog. Well, that advance notice is not required. I'm not required to tell a restaurant before I arrive that I have a service dog. I'm not required to tell a hotel or my doctor's office or any other place that I go that I'm a person with disability and I'm going to be accompanied by a service dog. Uber's trying to absolve themselves of the challenges that they're facing by not training their people well enough by implementing the self-ID policy. The challenge is that this self-ID policy is now being used as a reason to deny access. Well, you should identify that you have a service dog in advance. No, I don't have to do that. That's something Uber provides and offers, but I don't have to take advantage of that policy.
I've heard of a lot of.
Go ahead.
I said I've heard of a lot of Uber drivers being like, I'm scared of dogs, and actually like when seeing the dog just literally driving away.
Right, right. I know that happens quite a bit. In fact, my wife and I went out on a date just a couple weeks ago, and we had to call for 3 Ubers before we got one that would take us because my wife and I are both blind, and we both have service dogs, and we specifically requested an Uber XL so that we had enough room for both of the dogs. But both of them drove away without taking us. Fear of animals is not a reason to deny access to an individual accompanied by a service dog. And neither are allergies. Allergies to dogs do not rise to the level of a disability. One of the things I mentioned earlier is that there are certain protected classes. Disability is a protected class. People with allergies to dog dander generally do not have an allergy that rises to the level of a disability. In fact, what the statistics show is 0.0005%, or one half, what's that? One half of 10,000 people. 1/2% of 10,000 people have allergies to dogs that rise to the level of a disability. And the easiest way to accommodate for a person who might have an allergic reaction from the dog is to separate that person from the dog. In such cases, it's important to realize that you can't relocate the person with the disability. The person with the service dog is not the person to be relocated. It's the person who has a problem with the dog that should be relocated. So if we're sitting in a restaurant and somebody behind us has an issue, it's not up to me to move, it's up to them to move. That's not, I don't want to sound like I'm, being contentious or being unreasonable, but the fact of the matter is that if we were to attempt to make everybody happy, we would be compromising our civil rights.
Marion, I have a quick question about the service animal vests that they wear.
Mhm.
I think that's like the most obvious quote unquote credible assurance that we get. And I'm wondering if there's any like regulations, laws, policies regarding on who can actually get that vest for that dog, for their dog or service.
Yeah, that's a really good question. The fact of the matter is that the implementing regulations of the ADA specifically say that no special gear can be required. So they're not required to wear a vest or any sort of special leash or collar. I know there's a couple of states in the Northeast. I won't say what their names are because I don't know exactly which ones, but they border each other. One of them says that a service animal must be kept on a blaze orange leash and collar. The other state says it must be kept on a neon blue leash and collar. So you've got to have all these different pieces of gear in order to travel across state lines. Well, the fact of the matter is that none of that can actually be required. Service animal vests and any other sort of documentation are not considered credible assurance. They don't indicate whether the dog has been trained or not, or that the dog is going to be expected to behave itself. Think of this. My dog is now 8 years old. I've had him for 6 years. When he was 2 years old and I received him, he was completely trained, very well behaved. He did his job and he did it well. He still does after 6 years, but you can imagine someone who doesn't keep up their dog's training, how out of control a dog could become in 6 years. So just because I have an identification card that says my dog has been trained is no assurance that the dog is going to behave itself in public 6 years later. Vests can be made. They can be purchased online. And some people do put vests on their dogs. Now, the video, I think Marilyn might have shown a video earlier, and it showed a bunch of dogs, different service dogs performing tasks. Every one of those dogs had a vest on. And the reason for that is because we borrowed that from a Canadian organization. And in Canada, service animals must wear vests. That's a requirement of the Canadian civil rights laws. In the United States, that's not true. A vest does not confer any sort of privileges just because there's a vest on the dog that says it's a service dog.
Got it. Thank you.
No problem. So let's talk about a couple of specific areas. There's three areas, as I said, where we face the most challenges. We're gonna put Uber aside because they're an animal, so to speak, all in and of themselves. But the three places that we face the most challenges are probably due to the fact that we go there a lot, and those are restaurants, hotels, and healthcare facilities. So in a restaurant, the dog must be kept on the floor unless the dog is trained to do something like detect low blood sugar. Many times a dog, in order to detect low blood sugar, might be kept on a harness on the chest so that the dog can smell the breath. Now, they're allowed to do that, and they're allowed to keep it on their lap, but the dog is not allowed to sit on the seat. It's not allowed to be fed from the table. And when the dog is on the floor, it must be kept out of the way so that it doesn't cause a trip hazard. The service dogs are not allowed in areas of food preparation, so I can't take my service dog into the kitchen. If there's an event, for instance, where maybe people are invited to go into the kitchen and watch the chef work and be fed inside the kitchen, I'm allowed to do that, but I cannot take my service dog into the kitchen. So that would be an exception because that would cause what we know as a direct threat, a health risk that can't be eliminated by a modification of the policies, practices, and procedures. In a restaurant, a buffet line is not considered an area of food preparation, so I could take my dog up to the buffet line and through the buffet. When they prepare food at the table, that is not considered a place of food preparation when the food is prepared at the table. Hotels are also another place that we face a lot of challenges, especially in pet-friendly hotels. Even if a pet-friendly hotel, if you check into a pet-friendly hotel, you are not required to accept a room that is a pet-friendly room. We should not be relegated to only a pet-friendly floor. Even though pets are not allowed on the pool deck or in the fitness center, in the restaurants, in a hotel, wherever the individual goes with their service animal, or wherever an individual is allowed to go, they are allowed to go with their service animal. So they can go to the pool decks, although the dog cannot go into the pool because that's a health regulation. They can go to the fitness center. They can go to all of the common areas. They can go into restaurants. They're not allowed to sit on the seats of a public accommodation. So whether it's a bus or a taxi cab or a restaurant or a hotel, service animals, our adage is 4 on the floor. All 4 feet must be on the floor. And there are exceptions, but the exceptions did not allow for the dog to be on furniture. Okay. The dog must be kept under direct control. What that means is the dog, again, must be kept on a harness, leash, or tether, unless the presence of a leash, harness, or tether interferes with the work the dog is trained to perform. For instance, there are dogs who are trained for people who have post-traumatic stress. And one of the things that they might do is they might go to enter into a room, but before they do, they let the dog off leash. The dog goes in, scans the room, makes sure that the room is safe for the person, comes back to the person, indicates the room is safe, the dog is put back on the leash, and the person enters into the room. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, let's talk about a direct threat and what is a direct threat. A direct threat is a significant risk to the health or safety of others that cannot be eliminated by a modification of policies, practices, and procedures. So one of the best ways, and we're going to focus now a little bit upon healthcare facilities. One of the best ways to determine whether a dog can be allowed in a specific area of a healthcare facility is whether or not the individual one has the ability to care for the dog. So if you're a patient in a hospital and you are ambulatory, or you can find someone who will care for the dog, then you are allowed to have your dog in a healthcare facility, even if you're an inpatient, in an inpatient area of the restaurant. I'm sorry, of the hospital. Places of public accommodation are not required to care for the animal. So if those circumstances require you, for instance, to go have a CT scan, while you're having the CT scan, you're not going to be able to be accompanied by your service dog because you cannot have that direct control. Examination rooms are not sterile environments. We enter into those environments in our street clothes. If you enter into a place with your street clothes on, it is not a sterile environment. I have regularly, I go to a dermatologist quite a bit because I'm a fair-haired, blue-eyed, fair-skinned individual who spent too much time in the sun when I was in my 20s. And as a result, I go and get a lot of derm surgeries, and my dog lays on the floor right next to the table while they're operating on me. So it's not a sterile environment because I am there and I am in my street clothes. And as long as I'm in my street clothes, it's not a sterile environment. Now, there are circumstances, as I said, where a dog could be excluded. And if a dog is excluded because it's out of control or it causes a direct threat, it's up to the place of public accommodation to allow the individual with a disability to access its goods and services without the dog being present. Okay, now the final thing I want to talk about, we talk about discrimination. And a lot of people probably know what discrimination feels like, but they don't really know how to describe it. So let me tell you about the various different forms of discrimination, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. The most obvious form of discrimination, and I'm going to use again a restaurant to describe this. The most obvious form of discrimination is what we call a denial of benefit. That means you're not allowed to receive the benefits of the goods and services of that place. Restaurant, you walk in the door, they say, oh, no dogs, can't come in. That's a denial of benefit. Another way that you can be discriminated against, though, is through what we call an unequal benefit. So they seat you in the restaurant, everybody around you is getting served, they're taking your orders, they're bringing you drinks, they're bringing you food, and you sit there, and you sit there, and you sit there, and nobody pays any attention to you. And that is what is known as an unequal benefit. There's also a separate benefit. A separate benefit means that you're separated from the rest of the people. So most restaurants, to accommodate their servers, they seat everybody in one particular area, and they seat you with your service dog away from everyone else. They seat you back by the kitchen or by the restroom, places which are not the most optimal place to sit in a restaurant, separated from everybody else, so you don't get the same treatment as everyone else. And that is what is known as a separate benefit. Now, a lot of people don't realize that you don't need to be disabled in order to be protected by disability law. If you're associated with someone who has a disability and you're discriminated against as a result of that, so you go to a restaurant with a friend of yours who has a service dog and they won't let you in, you as a non-disabled person could file a claim of discrimination because of your association with the individual who is disabled. It is also illegal to retaliate or harass someone because they protect their civil rights. That is also a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So that is what I have for my presentation, and I hope I provided some information, but now I want to be able to answer your questions. We probably got about, what, 10 minutes or so left.
Yeah. Thank you for your presentation, Marion. At this time, if anyone has any questions or want to spark a discussion, this table is open. If you guys want to send a chat in the chat box, you guys are also welcome to. So I actually had a question, Marion, about the discrimination by association. What is the extent to that, like, association? Is it someone, if you're helping the disabled person, or you're just accompanying them? What is the limit to that discrimination?
There is no limit. I mean, just because a person's disabled doesn't necessarily mean they need assistance. You know, I've gone to one of the cases that we dealt with actually, and is being litigated here in Florida, involved a veteran who went to a restaurant. There were a total of 10 of them. One of them had a service dog, but all 9 of them were turned away. All 10 of them, the person with the service dog and 9 of his friends were turned away from a restaurant, just because of the fact that the person with a disability and had a service dog was turned away. The others weren't going to eat at the restaurant. If he wasn't going to be able to, they were all there together. So that association, it doesn't matter what that association is, if you face discrimination as the result of your association with an individual with a disability, it is a violation of federal law. And in the state of Florida, it's also a violation of our state law. And could very well be in Massachusetts as well. So it doesn't matter what the relationship is between the disabled and non-disabled person, if as the result of discrimination, the person is denied services, they have a claim that they can file.
Got it. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh.
I have 2 questions.
You want to say your name for Marion?
Do that. Hi, Marion. My name is Emma. I'm a disabled student here at Northeastern. I run the disability club on campus, and I'm also a master's in public health student here as well.
Very good.
Thank you.
Masters in public health. Public health is one of the disciplines that I'm trying to make inroads into, because they're the ones who make these policies in healthcare.
Yes, I'm interested in like public health advocacy and policy. So that's kind of my area that I'm hoping to go into. My first question is unrelated to that. My second question is more related to that. My first question is, I know someone that recently got their first service animal that's a diabetic alert dog. And I don't know them personally, it's like through a friend of a friend, but from what I heard about their dog, is that it's a service dog that's not meant for public access. Like apparently the dog is like really good at alerting for blood sugar, but doesn't like gets a lot of anxiety with like people and stuff like that. So I was just wondering if that's like a common thing or something that happens among like service dog owners, if people ever like have a reason to get a service dog that does perform tasks but isn't necessarily like suitable for public access, if that makes sense, and like why someone might want to go that route, if that makes sense.
To answer the second question first, I don't know why someone would want to go that route. To me, the service dog is a dog that's going to assist you when you're out and about and in public. And if the dog has anxiety being around other people, then it indicates to me that the dog seems to not have been really well, how would you say it? They haven't been exposed to that in order to allow them. I mean, that's the problem we have with people who think that all they got to do is slap a vest on their pet and take it into public. You know, these pets don't know how to behave in public. They don't know how to interpret the signals that are around them, that service dogs are exposed to and assessed for. If a dog is fearful out in public, I don't know how it could be a good service dog. Now, you
Yeah.
know, so I
That's
mean,
kind of what I
that's just my opinion. Now I don't want that opinion to be, oh, that's not a good service dog. I don't know, and I don't know the person's situation, but to me, service dogs are acclimated to and exposed to a lot of different environments, so that those unique circumstances don't create challenges. I know that people who raise puppies to be guide dogs take their dogs to places like fairs and carnivals, just because you're going to experience noises and sights and sounds and smells that you're not going to experience anywhere else. And if that's something that's new and something novel to the dog, then the dog's not going to be able to be kept under very good control in those circumstances. So that's my personal opinion. So
Yeah, no, I was like shocked a little bit to hear that too. I was like, that seems a little counterintuitive, I guess, or not like, doesn't really make sense, but thank you for answering that. And if no one else has any other questions, I did have a second question.
So Emma, let me also say that
Yeah.
if you have contact with someone within your public health department who is responsible for teaching things about ethics and law, I would really, really like to be able to do a presentation just on the presence of service animals in healthcare facilities.
Oh, please.
That could be quite an extensive program, and
Yes.
I'm hoping to network with the College of Nursing, since I now know a husky nurse that that might be able to help us with that as well, because the nurses on the ground, the people who are going to see the person with the disability first before the doctor does, they're the people who really need to know this sort of
Marion,
information.
actually, this is Mona. So just to tell you a little bit about me, I'm a blind professor here in the bioengineering department, and I have a PhD in chemistry. And I would love to connect you. So I'm part of a group called the Chemists with Disabilities, and we're in the American Chemical Society. And we actually have a lot of advocacy work around students needing service animals in the lab sometimes.
Okay.
And policy, I think it would be really great for me to connect you with
Great.
a lady that I know
I
that
knew
works.
I knew this was going to be an excellent networking opportunity for no other reason other than the fact that I'm working with others who have disabilities and have advanced degrees and can help to move these issues forward. My ultimate goal is to create a continuing medical education program for nurses and doctors concerning service animals. One of the really interesting pieces of information that I found in doing my research, not related to service animals, but related to disabilities, 58% of physicians feel as if they're not competent enough to treat an individual with a disability.
Yeah, or they I feel like they don't know how to interact with us.
Yeah.
Like I feel like they're very sometimes ableist. Okay.
And that's a really good word. If anybody hasn't heard that word, that it was just used, ableist. Ableist is the same sort of discrimination against disabled people as racism is against people of color. So ableism is a very serious challenge. And those of us with advanced degrees are sometimes treated as if we are ignorant, because disability, and in fact, blindness in and of itself, the word blind, if you look it up in the dictionary, one of the definitions is ignorant.
That comes from the Greeks, by the way.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, there's a whole interesting philosophy behind that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say I know the chair of the Department of Public Health and Health Sciences here as well, and I'm the only disabled person-ish in the program, but they're always looking to learn more and do more. So I'd be happy to pass you along to them if you'd be interested.
And likewise, if anybody, if anybody is in the College of Nursing or in the College of Business Administration, like I said, I took a course in business law, and very little was said about the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1992. And I would venture to guess that very little of this is actually still being discussed in business law classes. And it's a very, very important element. It's just as important to understand disability rights issues as it is to understand other areas of business law. So.
Did you want to ask your second question?
Oh yeah, I know we're running out of time.
We can wrap it up after your.
I don't know all the details about my second question fully, but I know you mentioned that primarily like legislation relating to service dogs is under the ADA, except for, I think you said in the federal government, that's under Section 504, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So I think I saw, like under the new kind of administration, I think I saw something come through recently that was challenging Section 504, seeking to kind of roll back some protections under that. So I was just curious to get your thoughts on like how like potential rollbacks on that could impact individuals with service animals, and ways that we could work to kind of protect access.
Yeah, you know, after the air disaster, one of the first things that came out
Yes.
was you know, the air traffic controller was mentally ill. There was absolutely no proof of that. It was just a statement that was made for whatever purposes it was made. Unfortunately, I don't agree. I live in Florida where DEI is under attack. I think diversity, equity, and inclusion is a very important part of the workforce. You know, you want to have a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workforce, because when you tap into everybody's experiences and you're able to use those experiences to develop better policy and treat people better, the whole community is elevated as the result of that. So I don't agree with these DEI or anti-DEI initiatives. I believe they're counterproductive, and I believe they are ableist points of view that are damaging to those of us with disabilities, and limit our capacity and our ability to provide good input as the result. So I'm very, very concerned about the anti-woke agenda. Someone told me one time, somebody mentioned to me how woke I was, and I said, yes, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Because to me, woke means that I'm awake. That's what the word means. And whether you're a Buddhist and says you're enlightened, or you're just an individual who says I'm awake, I'm aware, I see what's going on around me. And we all need to stand up against that sort of hatred and that sort of ableistic perspective, because those of us who are disabled have a lot to offer, and by limiting our input, we limit the potential that we have as a society.
Thank you for sharing us your thoughts, Marion. Today's presentation, we learned so much about it. The difference between a pet and a service animal is very big. And thank you for teaching us about our rights, their rights, and what we can do. So we'll be wrapping it up. I really want to thank our ASL interpreters, Atlas and James. Thank you so much for the interpretation today. This recording will be uploaded on YouTube for you guys to revisit, and I will also be sharing a folder of information about service animals with you guys. And thank you for attending today.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for
So,
coming.
my pleasure. If anybody has any other questions or comments and want to write to me, it's advocacy411@gmail.com. Advocacy411@gmail.com.